Hotep family, you're tuning into the pro-black perspective on KWAZ Radio, right? We're a part of a podcasting network, expanding, growing. Make sure you send some donations over to KWAZ Radio so that we can be on a wider platform and reach a wider audience. But in the meantime, in between time, subscribe to KWAZ Radio, subscribe to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, subscribe to the Harsh Reality Podcast, and of course, subscribe to the Queen's Council, right? And of course, follow us on Twitter. You know how to do that. If you don't, find out. But let's go right straight to today's podcast, which is going to be Reading the Book of Power, episode 15. And I kind of abridged the title to be The Law of Disintegration under the Eurasian, E.W. Blyden. But for what it's worth, just make sure that, for what it's worth, what it will be, the title for the book is going to be The Law of Disintegration under the Eurasian Competitive Order. And this is by Edward Wilmot Blyden. Now, here's what it is, right? This is actually a really excellent passage. And like I read his book, I think it's called African Life and Customs. Surprised I didn't write it down, but I might have written it in the bibliography. I don't know. But the point is that he writes this book and it really tells you about what it was like to be in pre-colonial Africa, right? Now, of course, I'm going to have some commentary on that as well. But the thing is that it shows you what we were, where we were, and how we were, and of course, you know, he draws conclusions from there. This passage in particular is so good because he's also going to tell us about the law of integration and the law of disintegration, and that's something that I really think like it has to be in a book. In fact, if you see in earlier. It's in Zubiri and the Moons of Ma'ah. So my first book my first published book would be Zubiri and the Moons of Ma'ah. And he talks about Zubiri talks about the law of disintegration there because it's that important. It's really one of the laws that you have to understand if you are still confused about, you know, whether you should go or stay, right? So let's keep going. I say, although I wrote Eurasian above, Baba only relates the European order, so I maintain the description below, right? So I write the Eurasian. He really says European, so I do something contrary to normal, and I actually use the terms that, you know, our ancestors have used, because really he's talking about Europeans, right? But let's keep going. I mostly included this passage for the law of disintegration that was mentioned in Zubiri and the Moons of Ma'ah, because here's the thing too, that when Zubiri and the Moons of Ma'ah, I do not explain what the law of disintegration is. So, you know, that means that you read Zubiri and you're like, what is the law of disintegration? And then you would want to eventually read the Book of Power and be like, oh, okay, sure, right? So all the books, they're all related. So definitely, you know, just get all three. And of course, when I work on a fourth one, get that fourth one too. You know that already, right? But surprisingly, this passage also touches on the law of Ma'at, which is the idea that we fight for our way. That's so important, you know, because that's the thing that you have to realize too, that the law of Ma'at is something universal among our people. And if we were to assume, and here's what I want to say too, in fact, if we were to assume a spiritual order, right, we could then say that the different spirituality, the different spiritual systems of Africa, like the Igbo, Yoruba, those would be considered the different sects, you know, SECT, as you know, for you people, whatever, but sects and divisions and all that kind of stuff, because that's really what it is. We are following, like, at the core of our belief system is this law of Ma'at. Right, this idea that we have to fight for our way, fight for our culture, and if we do not fight for our way, if we do not fight for our culture, then we're not like we are going to die, you know. And that's really what this is all about. You know, there are things more important than life, right? And those things would be your way, you know, our way. But let's keep going. And by the way, for those of you who are not familiar, our way is actually a term from Arma's work 2000 Seasons. So 2000 Seasons, a very good book. I kind of, you know me, I'm critical. I kind of thought it was kind of like slow in the beginning of the reading, and kind of hard to, like, the grammar was kind of off and all that kind of stuff. But notwithstanding, that's a really good and deep book. and I would recommend that as well. So just just add to your reading collection. I do not put it as one of the fundamental texts, one of the 12 texts, 13 texts. If you wanted 13 texts to just read and jump into everything, sure, you can. You could exclude that. But if you really wanted to just go through and get some good books in your hand, Arma's 2000 Seasons is one of them, right? But let's keep going. So this is informative because Baba wrote this book in 1908 WP after studying at length in Africa. So that's the good thing about Blyden. He studies at length in Africa. I think he was born in Africa and raised in Africa, but I'm not 100% on my memory, right? It's also worth noting how fundamental Eurasian training is for Askari mentality and how destroying the African way was deliberate and eventually successful. This is something you have to realize too, that the European took up people, right? I mean, you have to understand this effect. Like when you send for instance, my child, he doesn't go to public school system, right? When your child goes to public school system, you're going to realize a transformation in their personality. And of course, if they're going to public school system for 12 years, right? That transformation is going to be more significant than whatever it was that you were indoctrinating them with for the 5 or 6 years before they went to the public school system, right? A lot of you put your children in 3 years, 3 years into the public school system. And so they have like 15 years of indoctrination. But the reality being that a part of that indoctrination of the public school system is to give you that Askari mentality. And it's to destroy the African way. And it's deliberately to destroy your African way. Because I tell you guys this story. This is a really important story. You don't really pay attention to it. But the story goes that some kid in my class, I was in elementary school, some kid in my class is coughing, right? So then I get out of my seat while we're in class and slap on his back, right? Now, why do I get out of my seat? Now, of course, then the teacher reprimands me. She says, don't get out of your seat randomly. That's, whatever. Second of all, she says, what you're doing, like don't slap a kid or whatever, right? And third, what you're doing is backwards, right? She's telling me that. So basically, I'm not going to pretend and say that this is some African tradition. I don't know, right? But basically, in my family, right, we understood that, if you slap somebody's back while they're coughing, you could assist them, you could aid them or something like that. Now, maybe it's ridiculous, maybe it's not. But the point is that you do it to help somebody else. And the teacher reprimands me for being a helpful person. She reprimands me for getting up freely, right? And she says, no, you have to sit down, and if somebody's suffering right next to you, right, don't do anything. And eventually you don't do anything. And I can tell you that by the time I get to college, I do have an Askari mentality. I do. I could tell you about my interactions and engagements with other people of our race and say that, yeah, it was less than savory. Like sometimes you would engage a black person and you would regret it like the day after. But that's how we were trying. Like the Askari mentality is like, I was not fully Askari, right? Because sometimes you could say I was astute, you could say I was an activist, and you could say like all four aspects, all four stages of consciousness were in me, right? But there was no reason for that Askari mentality to be inside of me. I went from I'm going to be in a classroom, get up and go help my neighbor, right? To if that person saw, to walking by homeless people without even noticing. Once upon a time when you were younger, you were just like, oh, there's a homeless person. Oh my gosh, that's so sad. Right? Now you're just like, yeah, whatever, scumbag. I would say you're going to say scumbag, but, there are people who say that. And that's something that they put into you. And it deliberately destroying the African way. That's so important. And he's going to outline that. So I'm going to tell you that, because we have to be about solutions, right? You need to seek and develop Oncobia training if you truly wish to counter the clear and evident instrument of Askari development, right? So naturally, we're going to break down what that solution is, and that's why it's Boko Waset na Keru is the only answer. You may note Baba's observation on early African economic activity is contradictory to the Keru concept. So remember that in the law of Ma'at, we talk about the Keru concept, right? Sorry, I just drank a bunch of water, right? But anyway, you made note that he's going to talk about the economic activity, kind of a communalistic, egalitarian economic community, and naturally Blyden is a socialist, so you would expect this kind of talk, right? But I want you to understand, I want you to note that he's observing African low culture, okay? And it's worth pointing out that African high culture isn't contradictory to what he defends. It's just refined for greater productivity, okay? So there's African low culture and there's African high culture. And African high culture is kind of like what happens when African low culture is given a chance to refine and develop into a greater productivity. And this is something that we have to understand as a people, because what we tend to do is we tend to misunderstand how we can use our ways to be productive and develop. Because remember that our ancestors all over Africa, not just the Nile Valley, but all over Africa, built megalithic, like monuments, megalithic structures. The biggest earthen work on the planet was in Nigeria, Edo, Nigeria, and it's this huge rampart that just surrounds, I guess, a city or something. But it's like this huge wall, a longer wall than the one in China, which also, some people may not understand this, but was also built by ancient Africans. But nobody wants to hear that, because they're going to be like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And I don't have time to explain to you what the history of the human race looks like, but for a lot, but yeah, in Nigeria they build this, the biggest pre-modern structure on the planet is in Nigeria. There's the Great Wall in Zimbabwe, I believe, right? It's this huge these huge planned cities, like those are what African high culture looks like. The little huts and the drum, those are not necessarily the same caliber, and it's fine. It's understandable when you are a population that has to retreat from these major cities that are being destroyed or preyed upon. Yes, you are not going to necessarily develop and build and all that kind of stuff. And this is of course outlined in Chancellor Williams' Destruction of Black Civilization. But it's just very important to understand that from that low culture, which is fine, it's just a good culture, it's our culture, it's African culture, right? But from that low culture, there's a high culture. There comes a high culture, and that's really what we want to return to, and what we can return to, as long as we do this. And of course, I'm going to say why. It says, what's more, African low culture is what allows for the easy Askari and Eurasian takeovers. So you see the little huts and all that kind of stuff, that could easily be taken over. Now, high culture can be taken over as well, obviously. Everything can be taken over, even Wazungu says, he's fearful of aliens, higher intelligent beings coming over to his planet, or not his, but our planet, coming over to our planet and taking over. He understands this is a possibility, or he understands that robots, if artificial intelligence gets to some sort of intellectual level, blah, blah, blah. Now, of course, this is, then they could take over the planet. Now, of course, this is, white people's, subtle way of saying that intelligence is the best thing and they have the best intelligence. That's their subtle way. But it's really also important to understand that if you have possession of greater weapons, yes, you can take over people with lesser weapons. That's just reality. It's not even about weapons as much as it's about war. As long as you can win a war, or even said it differently, here's a quote that white people share. It says, war doesn't determine who is right. War determines who is left. That's it. And what that means, it's a little play on words between right and left. But the reality is that whoever is remaining after the war gets to decide what's going on, because they're going to be the local power now. You get what I'm saying? If said differently, if two people are fighting, like you're in your house, and somebody's fighting you for your house, and then they kill you, right? Or then they subdue you, then it's their house. You understand? Like, there's no way that it's your house anymore. Now, of course, what stops you losing your house is if your government doesn't allow people to just walk into your house and take you from you. But if your government does allow it, then you've lost it. That's what happened in Tuskegee, in fact. The government was like, yeah, okay, if they want to freaking bomb you, they'll bomb you. And you're not going to do anything about it. This is why, again, this is another reason why you do not want to be under a foreign government, because foreign governments are always going to bias foreigners. And you're not I mean, yeah, I guess you're not a foreigner. You know what I'm saying? So that's another thing. And of course, I would rather say racial group, but just for the soundbite. Not that anybody's soundbiting me, but just for the soundbite. Anyway, let's go. So I says you don't want low culture again. So what our objective is to return to African high culture. We love, and it's not to say that low is worse than high. But it is. You know what I mean? It's like not to say that not to say that's bad, but to understand that Ascati and Eurasians can take over low culture easier. If we're in high culture, you can develop your own weaponry. You could hold up a fight. You could put up a fight. You could put up a fight, and as long as you could put up a fight, you can win. That's what happened in IT. They could put up a fight, so they won. Or they could have won, and they did win, and that's it. As long as you could put up a fight. If you can't put up a fight, then shit. You know what I'm saying? All right, but anyway, I'm gonna say thank you everybody for listening. Okay, we got 2 people. Organic African paradigm. So that's Scully again. Scully is awesome. So let's go. The one who comes in peace is always welcome. Positive and creation energy to you. So peace, Scully. How is everything going with you? Scully has some good content, so you guys got to go check him out, right? Chaka is here. He says somebody got a new mic. I see. This guy, he's very sensitive with his ears. You know what I mean? like this brother could tell you what is he could hear things, right? But anyway, let's go. Let's keep going. So the production of wealth in Europe is communistic in the highest degree. Okay, so the production of wealth in Europe is communistic in the highest degree, but the distribution is individualistic in its most intense form, hence the social unrest and discontent. So he's talking about Europe, and he's like this, like realistically speaking, when we talk about communism versus capitalism, right? In Europe, they actually have communism, right? But the distribution of the wealth, like the production of wealth, is communalistic. That they are producing the wealth at a community level. But the distribution of the wealth is individualistic and in a very intense form. And this is why you're going to have social unrest and discontent. I do want to remind you all, though, that when you review European history, that Europeans have always had a exploitative system, right? If you look at, or generally speaking, they always have an individualistic system, an exploitative system, because like Marx actually breaks down the different societies that, like the different progression stages of European economies. And he says first there's primitive communism, which really didn't happen, but whatever. There's primitive communism. Then there is slavery. Then there is feudalism. No, sorry, there's feudalism. Then there's maybe slavery, feudalism, then capitalism, right? So those 3 economies, feudalism, slavery, and capitalism, they're all exploitative systems, right? Naturally. Slavery, I mean, that's almost undoubtable. But the feudalism, this one you probably don't really know, but basically it was a system where there were lords and nobles and kings, and on the other side were peasants. You get what I'm saying? And the peasants were just taken advantage of. And this is the system that basically becomes this plantation system, the slavery system, but it also becomes the capitalist system, right? So he's saying that as a community, they are really well integrated together to produce wealth, but to distribute the wealth, they just give it to the certain, the nobility, the lords, and so on and so forth. The only thing difference between capitalism and feudalism is that the nobility, quote unquote, can now what you call it? They can now. I mean, it could be anybody. It could be a peasant who eventually gets lucky and blah blah blah. But so and this is the critique some people say about Marx. They say that while Marx says that there is a bourgeois class that is in power or whatever, like he doesn't acknowledge that this bourgeois class is always rotating. To the point where today's bourgeoisie is not yesterday's bourgeoisie, to a large extent, in the sense of in the sense of, and then of course, there's also the transformation of the economy to where, people like Amazon who, people like Jeff Bezos who would not be traditional bourgeoisie are like the richest people on the planet. But all right, let's keep going. So the proletariat are ever on strikes, men and women not only clamoring for higher wages, but for a more equitable division of the results of the communistic labor. That is, the results which capital and labor together have produced. All combinations for industrial purposes is cooperative, but the difficulty in Europe, we should perhaps say the impossibility, is to get an equitable share of the proceeds for each party who contributes to the result. And that is the problem which is now confronting the leaders of English society in a spiritualism and state. So, of course, I say in religion and state, but of course, he says religion and state, but I don't use the word religion, right? But like, I want to come back to this though. This is actually pretty interesting. So this is again, this is written in 1908, right? And so this is like 100 years ago, and yet it's a misconception, right? It's a misconception. We have to acknowledge that part of the reason why the produce, like the labor, like part of the reason why the proceeds are not equitable, right? It's probably the reason why there's not an equitable division in the results of the labor is because in capitalism, right, there is an initial investment that labor does not take a part in. Okay, so if I go to work for a factory, I did not actually contribute anything to the creation of that factory. You know what I mean? So I would contractually. So what happens is the factory says, "Hey, look, we're going to offer you these wages to work for us. However, this factory cost the owner several $1 million above, like several $1 million. Okay, it costs the owner money, right? It does not cost the labor any money. So if you were to say, hey, how can you equitably give to the labor and the investor, the capitalist, right? How could you equitably, and then your conclusion is give the same to the investor as the labor? It would be to misunderstand that actually is not an equitable division. But of course, this is actually I want people to understand this is a recurring theme in the African discourse, even from 1908. Because I just got a message from a brother, recently who was, I guess he was against crypto or something, but he was saying, why is we're keeping money to ourselves and blah, blah, blah. We're not, we don't have an equitable division. And it's like, yeah, there's no way to equitably divide unless you had unless in capitalism, you had the people, the labor working for free. You understand? That's the only way to equitably divide, in the sense that, because naturally, if the capitalists paid for the thing, right, then they would be working for free. Even if they're getting, they'll be working for free, even if they're getting paid. Or in other words, if the labor is getting $15 an hour, right, and the capitalist is getting $100,000, is getting $500 an hour or whatever, right? I don't know, just giving a number. All right, $1,000 an hour, whatever, right? The reality is that the labor is actually getting more than the capitalist until the capitalist actually gets a return on their whole investment. You understand? And then the capitalist will be getting way more. But the reality being that unless or until that's as an investor. Now, obviously, the CEO, who might not necessarily be the owner, will be getting a lot more money. But that's because the people who are the owners, the board of directors, the people who invested the money, want that person to lead the chart. So it's a really complicated system that we tend to be very critical of. But at the same time, it's like if you really understand what it is, what capitalism means, what it means about, I'm putting capital and ergo I deserve a larger share because I actually lost money in investing this thing, then it becomes, you're not going to necessarily equalize the amount of money, notwithstanding. Because you might say, yeah, labor is the one that makes it profitable, but it's just not. Well, the thing is that it's not really profitable for somebody to invest capital. unless they do take exceedingly higher wages, because otherwise it won't be right. So Scully says European culture, liege lords and peasants or serfs, right? So yeah, that's European culture. They have liege lords, peasants or serfs, and they actually divide it, so on and so forth. And EL is explaining it a little more. He says lords own the land and serfs provide the labor. Serfs provide the labor, and the lords take away the produce, right, etc. And so that's like a system of exploitation, and that was a little bit more clear. But again, even in that example of the lord and the so on and so forth, the way how the Lord would look at it, and not to say that I'm looking at it from a position of the upper class or whatever, but the way how they would look at it is that they fought for the land. You know what I mean? Or that they put their life at risk for the land. When the French want to take over the British land, it's sometimes the peasants actually sit out of the fight. Now, obviously, they do have the peasants fight eventually, but the peasants are not going to be trained in. It's a complicated process that white people have, like, they've made to be legitimate in their own sense, but that's what it is. So he says capitalists do get their return in a short period. What is wrong with capitalism is the increase in labor without the increase in compensation. Yeah. So that's the thing. So it's like, so Scully says capitalists do get their return in a short period. What is wrong with capitalism is the increase in labor without the increase in compensation. Yeah. So they do. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's like, I would say that, because I remember listening to, like I said, you guys got to go listen to Harsh Reality Podcast and all that. But I remember them talking about how one of the things inside of, like, one of their complaints or one of their acknowledgments is the fact that when we go to a business, we tend to, like we are offered wages and we can either accept or reject it. And the fact that we accept it and then say, okay, well, I want to get paid more, right, is a little bit contradictory, Now, of course, as Scully says, well, what about if they were to actually, give you more work after you were contractually obliged? Well, then I would say, well, that's where you would have to go into labor laws and all that kind of stuff, which is something that we don't tend to do. But that would then be a particular case where, and of course, like I said, I would ask for, you'd have to just ask for a raise. But the idea that you would have to demand a raise or all that kind of stuff is also the other thing to it. But I would say, and that's particularly it too. It's like wages and equitability almost don't even go together, and this is the contradiction. I think this is the contradiction that Blyden is pointing out. And this is why, like, it's almost like social unrest and discontent are going to be intrinsic in the system, because no matter what happens, you're going to be clamoring for higher wages, even notwithstanding the fact that if this industry is to be profitable, it might want to limit the wages. It's a really complicated situation and a really complicated system. And it's like, but that's it. It's like, it's Wazungu's system. So that's what they have for them. That's what's in store for them. And they're going to want that. I think the other day I said what's the best passage. Scully says, I once worked 10 years for a company and got 10 cents rise each year, but double the work each year. Damn, double the work each year? That's over 10 years, that's a lot more work. If you double every year, it's a lot more work. That's like, I don't know, I want to say, like, I don't know, 2 to the 10th power. That's a big number. But I mean, that's realistic. I mean, it's possible. But the way the white unions is bad. The way they fight unions is bad too. Yeah, the capitalists fight unions. Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. They're cutting back on the wages naturally. I mean, but again, that's the European system, and I think that's really something important that we have to realize or acknowledge, that in fact the European is going to try to subdue, try to maximize costs, even at the expense of people. Oh, revolutionary matrons here. Greeting. Capitalism has inherent exploitation. Capitalists increase all the other costs of life after offering you a job. It's a rigged game. Capitalists own all the capital. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Like Wazungu and inflation robs you too. What El says inflation robs you too. So it's like, yes, that's what it is. That's one of the things that we have to come to grips with. It's the reality that Wazungu does have an economic system that is going to be exploitative notwithstanding. It's going to be exploitative notwithstanding, right? And the thing is that he cannot fix it. He cannot repair it because it's inherently broken. It's intrinsically broken. And like nobody mentioned it yet, but he's also training robots to replace you in certain occupations. And because he's doing that, like there's a lot that's going on, and it's going to rip you. It's not something that you want to stick around for, because it's not going to work. The increased wages is not going to work as a solution, because there's no way to have a system where one person or one group invest in it and then expect that labor is going to get the same amount as them, right? But then if this group actually happens to control most of the capital and most of everything, then they can set the wages, and then the union and them come at odds, and then yes, they also control the police. You know what I mean? They also control the law enforcement, and the law enforcement is going to shoot down the unions and so on and so forth. So it's a really damning situation, and it's one of those systems that you don't want to be in. And so, of course, Edward Wilmot Blyden is going to tell you about Africa, hopefully soon. But all right, so he says, this is also our complaint against the aspiritual deception center. So, those are churches, right? So this is our complaint against the churches, as it has been brought to us from Europe. It has demoralized the social system of Africa. It has robbed us of our communistic spirit by its denominational strifes and rivalries, and is helpless to supply a remedy. So he's saying, look, the reality is this, that the churches of Europe cannot even fix capitalism, right? And yet what they're doing is that the churches of Europe are also putting this capitalist mentality into Africa, even though it's this capitalism that they are pushing is something that they can't fix and they know is a problem, right? So he says it has put a book into our head, as an old prominent female member of an a spiritual deception center said to us last week, and has taken love from our heart. And this is what I told you about, the example of me in school, where I'm like trying to help a kid, and it's like, no, you don't have love in your heart, let's see. And yet the people, owing to their spiritual aspirations and necessities, cling to the organization with the loyalty and devotion which amazes the outsider at the patience and inertness with which the mass of people acquiesce in what they deem to be their lot. So he's like, look, they cling to this organization, right? They cling to the church with loyalty and devotion, which actually amazes other people at the patience and inertness of the masses who just acquiesce to what they deem to be their lot. So even though they have this poverty, they acquiesce to this poverty. And we see this to this day. So he says the aspiritual deception centers not only does not help, but imposes burdens upon the people for which there is no warrant, even in its professed aspiritual beliefs. So even in Christianity, they do all this. So let's see. EL says facts. Says the robots will put us in a serious trouble as Africans, right? And again, the robots will put us in serious trouble if we stay in America. Because again, if you're in a different economy, the robots don't really bother you unless they're sending robots to attack you. And then, yes, they probably do bother you. But realistically speaking, what happens in one community doesn't really impact another community. So, what I mean to say is this, that Japan has automated restaurant waiters, right? So like there's a restaurant in Japan, or there's a restaurant in Japan where all the waiters are robots, right? They're on, like just kind of like Roomba robots, not like androids or whatever, right? Or they also have like parking lots where there are underground tunnels where you can drive in, take a card, and then they will deliver your car underground, so you don't have to do any sort of parking or whatever like that on your own, any manual parking. That has no impact on the restaurant industry in America. It has no impact on the parking industry in America. The reality is that as long as it's in another nation or even another locale, it really doesn't have any impact on you, with the exception of if they were to go to war with you, right? So, Organic African Paradise says, how should the African destabilize capitalism to ensure the strength of our communalism? So, again, right, it depends on what capitalism you mean, but if you mean the capitalism in the West, that's exactly the point. It's like, unless you are at war, like an active war with the West, you don't actually have to destabilize or change the system. Now, obviously, with capitalism and its exploitation of the world and its destabilization of the air quality, right, or the atmospheric quality, obviously you do want to be aggressive against it, but there are other means than what have you. I would recommend that we as an African people develop and build up our own communities in Africa. And you'll notice that when you build up your communities in Africa and you do what it requires of you to restore the environment and all that kind of stuff, that it almost would be immaterial what they are doing on the other side of the planet. Because again, what they're doing in North Korea doesn't really impact us. What they're doing in China doesn't really impact us. What they're doing in Sri Lanka doesn't really impact us. The reason why we feel the heaviness of capitalism is because we are in the capitalist society. But and of course now you might say, well, there's capitalism in Africa. Yes, there's capitalism in Africa. So that's something that you'd want to vie against and fight against. But that right there would be a lot easier because, again, anytime, unfortunately, one of the answers to everything, the answer to everything is war. One of the answers to everything is war. But there's also diplomacy, right? There's also politics. So, and of course, I guess it's Mao Zedong would say, politics is just war without weapons or something. I don't know, but you guys know what I'm saying. So EL would say we cannot be a monoculture providing only labor as labor becomes obsolete. Exactly. So labor becomes obsolete. Yeah, and that's the thing. But it's like you are going to, if you're in another person's nation, you're going to be whatever they want you to be. And this is the trouble with us, is that we're kind of going from the perspective of being another person's nation. Organic African Paradigm says the West is always at war. They are in a perpetual state of war against everything that they see as benefiting their interests. Globalization has made Africa its slave. Yeah. But again, yeah. So the West is always going to be at war, but that's why you'd want to fight and resist it. That's one thing that we have to, as a people, really focus on, is that we have to fight and resist it. But fighting and resisting it, it's almost like if you're going to fight something, you have to fight it from the outside. I told you guys this story. This is a story about, like, I'm on Twitter, right? No, I'm on Reddit. And there was this thread, and I didn't know this person wasn't black. But, I engaged them, and then they told me that they were like part black. Like they were like maybe like a quadroon or something. But by quadroon, I mean like they're like, or maybe they were, I don't know what they were, but basically one of their grandparents was a Jew a European Jew in Nazi Germany, right? And if you ask them, what could a European Jew have done to Nazi Germany during the Holocaust during their Holocaust, he said nothing. And that's the thing that we have to realize too, is that realistically speaking, there was nothing that an individual or even a group of European Jews could have done to Nazi Germany. That in fact, the only way that Nazi Germany would have been defeated was from the British, French, Russian, and American alliance, and whatever other nation fought against Germany. But the reality is that if you were in the nation, if you were a population in the nation, you weren't going to do anything. And so one of the most important things you want to do is get out of the whatever situation. It's just like in the hood. There's nothing you could really do in the hood. I put up events in the hood of America, and they just tear down my flyers. And not just that, if the building owner, who is not going to be an African, right, or who's most likely not an African, if the building owner says do not put up flyers in my building, your flyers game is lost, right? If you're standing on the corner, sometimes you stand on the street corner, you just, engage people. The reality is that sometimes, particularly in those areas, they will find that as an aggressive, like they will come to inquire what you're up to and then tell you to agree. All right, sorry. Organic Pan-African Imperialist says I agree or get out, right? But they will tell you, hey, you're on my turf, and what you're doing I don't like. Get off. And if you don't get off, because these are going to be like essentially, if you've been to the hood, you'll understand that a lot of it is one gang territory against another gang territory, right? And they kind of control the commerce, and by commerce I mean like, let's say, the drug commerce. And if you seem to threaten that, they will try to kill you. You know what I'm saying? Because if you're just especially if you're not defending yourself. Now, if you were to, now what you could do is you could go down there as a gang yourself, but then it's again the same problem, you know? So the best thing you could do is obviously, like, if you're in the hood, you just get out. That's it, you know? And then if you wanted to help the hood, you would have to do it from the outside. And again, you would have to do it from like a position of power and authority. And we see this honestly when it comes to how the police in like a blink of an eye can change a dangerous neighborhood into a safe neighborhood, right? Safe enough for white folk, right? But they can do that because they're an outside entity. They're not necessarily in the hood with its poor economic structure. They are outside of the hood with a stronger economic structure and can, arrest and blah, blah. And of course, they do this as a nation. And that's another thing that we have to realize too, that only a nation can arrest the people within it. And I mean, you can as individuals do that, but don't let the nation find out. If I start arresting people, like there's this story, there's this movie by, what's his name? The guy who does Malcolm X, and he does all his other movies. But he has this movie where, I can't remember his name, but he has this movie where it's like, I think, Drop Ship or Drop Squad, right? And the idea is that you would kidnap, people who are confused or whatever, and then bring them, then re-indoctrinate them, right? And then, bring them back to the community. The reality is that if you're going around a community kidnapping people, you are breaking some sort of law, right? And if you're breaking laws and you get found out, then that nation is going to arrest you if it wants to. Spike Lee, there you go. Again, it says Spike Lee. So EL says man's greatest protection is a nation, your own nation. And that's it. That's really that's really what it is. The protection of any African person is going to be a nation. You can't just start, if you're acting outside of a nation, because see, the police can just come into your home. Bit of Medicine is here. Make sure you guys check out Bit of Medicine podcast as well, right? But anyway, but if you just go into a community and start kidnapping people, right? And you get found out, they are going to throw the book at you. And if you're kidnapping people to make them into more functional people, while that might sound good to you and me, right? It doesn't sound good to America. So yeah, you're going away for a long time, without a doubt, without a doubt. So anyway, the spiritual deception center not only does not help, blah, blah, blah. So he says, Africans living under native laws and institutions would never cooperate with any man or company to the end that one man or company should appropriate to his or her or their own use and benefits the whole of the surplus wealth resulting from their joint efforts. So he's saying that, because surplus wealth is created by an industry. And now remember, again, he's clearly in the socialist camp. So he's using terms that we see from the socialists, right? But he's like, basically, under native laws and institutions, we do not cooperate with one another to give one person, right, all the surplus wealth, right? And of course, I think this is hyperbole. Like I said, the surplus wealth in the capitalist system, relates back to the fact that the capitalists did the initial investment. So it's not really surplus wealth for the capitalists, because it's like they're going to be in a deficit. Now, as Scully pointed out, they eventually are able to repay themselves, but it also it also comes to us. Why would I put in? It's like I'll give you an example. Matter of fact, so this sister comes to me and she says that she wants to do I shouldn't really say it, but she says a food truck business, right? And she's like, yeah, if we do a food truck business, we'll be set, right? And she's like, all you got to do, Oni, is get 12, or let's say 15. Oh, well, I already said 12. All right. And she says $12,000 from the bank to loan you $12,000. Then we can get this food truck, and we could all, we could all eat well for the summer or whatever, right? And it's like, it's a good idea, right? It's a good idea, except for the fact that now it becomes, how much do we all get paid? Because let's say we all get paid for, like, if we all, let's say that there's a profit and we split it 3 ways. The reality is that over time, in fact, the reality is that I'll be $12,000 short, right? And if we split even $4,000, right, evenly, or $3,000 evenly, like let's say we get $3,000 in the first month, right? I get $1,000, she gets she was gonna do this with like her partner or something, right? So her and him get $2,000. I get $1,000. But you can even say each of us get $1,000. But the thing is, the difference is this: that I will be at a net negative $11,000, and she'll be at a net $1,000, right? Fast forward, eventually, after the business makes $36,000, right? She will get $12,000. Her man will get $12,000, and I will get $0. You see what I'm saying? So realistically speaking, what would be surplus wealth is not really surplus wealth until I'm at zero. So after we get $36,000 of the business, I'll be at zero. She'll be at $12,000. You understand? I got nothing from investing $12,000. Right? Now fast forward, eventually you can say it all. And the thing is, this is never going to even out as long as we split it 3 ways, because they're always going to be $12,000 ahead of me. Right? Instead, what you would want to do is you'd want to say, hey, you know what, Oni? Now here's where the other situation comes in. What if I took 50% and they took 25% each, right? Let's do the math. Let's say that means that by the time we get $24,000, right? If they get 25% of 24,000, they get $6,000 each, and I still get zero, even though I got 50%, right? Because I got a net zero. Now, eventually, after that, I'll start to get more. But the whole point being that unless everybody gave in evenly, it wouldn't really add up that everybody gets out evenly. You understand what I'm saying? So that's really the root of capitalist misdistribution in a sense, right? Is the fact that, mathematically there's no way, unless of course you say, okay, well now at this point we all, like after I reach zero, then we all, whatever, then we all get the same amount. But even then it becomes, well, then why the freak did I put in more? Like, why the freak did I put in more? Why? If I'm just going to get the same amount. You understand? Now here's the other issue to it. If there was a food truck, the reality is this, that I probably wouldn't put as much work as her and her boyfriend. But the food truck wouldn't exist without my capital. So it really comes down to, where's the capital? Like capital is at the root of it. Now, or even her lack of access to capital. But that's where it becomes even more complicated, because you might say, well, socialism could solve that, right? But what socialism sometimes postulates is that the government, the collective of people, are going to put in the capital, so that everybody kind of already puts in the capital, and this kind of unbalances it. But what if the food truck idea is stupid? You understand? What if the food truck idea is yogurt, right? Like let's say it's dairy yogurt to an Ethiopian community, right? Ethiopians are notoriously vegan, right? Labor and ideas have to find balance, right? Yeah, so revolutionary matrix. Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying. Another thing is like the idea. So that's what happens, is that now you invest $12,000 of the people's collective fund into a food truck that goes under. And then the whole economy is going to go under afterward. You understand? If they keep on being bad ideas. So it's a really complicated situation that unless or until on like it's a really complicated situation. This is why economics is not really a simple situation, and it really comes down to us requiring a governing class or a government or whatever, but a governing or leadership. We really require leadership to be intelligent and make intelligent moves. Because the reality is that if they make the wrong move with the resources of the community, then the community suffers. But if they make the right moves with the resources of the community, then the community will benefit. And that's really what it comes back to. So, of course, we come here and we say, look, surplus wealth accumulated and distributed more equitably. We want that. But we have to also understand that that means that the community at large has to invest its resources and its capital in intelligent products. And this is why you want a particular education and a particular class among your leadership. Because if you do not have that, everything's going to suffer. And I think this is like a really important conversation that we don't have enough. And of course, shout out to Mchaka, because I know Mchaka was friendly to the socialist idea. But this is kind of like what I would say in regards to this socialism versus capitalism idea. So organic African paradigm says, okay, regarding capital, are there pure capitalist investments or are there some taxes involved? For capital, well, that's what I'm saying. In America, realistically speaking, it is both communistic and like it's kind of like what Blyden says. It's really communistic and capitalistic in the sense that, I didn't read the whole headline, but I think Jeff Bezos does this space program and it fails. It's a blunder. So they're taking out tax dollars to make him recoup his loss. And that's what happens. Like, I think Donald Trump was, he used to be the president of America, apparently. But moment of laughter, right? But anyway, this guy, he went bankrupt maybe like 10 times. I don't know. But every time you go bankrupt, essentially as far as I understand, the government takes over your debt. You know what I mean? It just takes up your debt. So it's going to be public financing anyway. The reality is, but this is something we have to realize too, that realistically speaking, every nation on this planet is going to benefit their upper class. You understand? Every nation is in place to benefit their upper class because the upper class made it for that purpose. The upper class makes the government. It's like the king is the one who makes the government. It's going to benefit the king before it benefits the peasants. EL says the idea is one thing, but even the execution can make the business fail. Exactly. The idea is one thing. Exactly. The idea doesn't mean anything. Like the lady comes to me and says, let's make a food truck. That doesn't make any money, realistically speaking. Because I was like, I'm not giving no $12,000, and that's it. That was the end of it, right? But if I didn't say that particularly, but I was just like, shit, I don't know. I don't have a plan. I have a plan, but you can make a food truck, and then we're just like, you know what? We got busy. We didn't, it was not a good idea, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just down. I just have a food truck. You know what I mean? It's not going to make you money automatically. You have to work and hustle at it. Too big to fail. And too big to fail is a really important concept too. I want to say that it relates back to the, what happened in coronavirus. So what happens at the airport, the airplanes need to keep going, even though they were relying on air travelers, right? So they got money, because if they did not get money, they would have to go in debt and then possibly be auctioned off to foreign countries. You get what I'm saying? So it's like you do not want, because now after COVID, right now, the air travel is back, right? But if they had said, you know what, you businesses handle your losses as it is, you don't have any more customers, handle your losses. If they had not intervened, then that airport that you are going to now might have been owned by another country. You get what I'm saying? Or might be closed down, shut down, and then America would be unable to trade anymore. It's a really complicated story, but we're gonna keep going. I see a lot of comments. Yesterday was a Bit of Medicine podcast. He said, "Come through for." He said, "Come through for the reading the Book of Power." And sure, people were like, you know what, let's do it. So I like that. Thanks for the shout out, Bit of Medicine, right? So he says, Dr. Clark said that, revolutionary matron. So I remember her from yesterday. She says, Dr. Clark said that communities used to have thinkers that did nothing but think. For the community, we need thinkers and we need to pay them. Exactly, right? Organic African paradigm says exactly. They use textiles to bail out people who are capitalists. Of course, they're going to benefit their upper class. And EL says even qualitative EA sign looks like socialism for the rich. I don't know what EA sign is, but yeah, I don't know what EA sign is, but I think qualitative easing. Yeah, qualitative easing looks like socialism for the rich, and that's what it is. It's always going to be socialism for the rich. This is the thing that we have to understand about nations, right? They are designed by the upper class to benefit the upper class. Once you understand, and this is everywhere on the planet, it's never about the underclass. You know, the thing is that we're trained to think it's about the underclass. It's never about the underclass. It's always about the upper class. As soon as you understand that it's always about the upper class, it kind of tells you that you as an African individual have to infiltrate the upper class. You have to go where it's easy to get into the upper class, and then you can do that, and then you can use what you have to help out the underclass. Because the underclass is a second thought. Okay, the underclass is a second thought. The overclass is the first thought, is the primary thought. Once you understand that, you get into the overclass, and then you can help the underclass. But you're not going to, as the underclass, help the underclass, right? That's something that doesn't really happen, right? So he says, basically, America's communists preserving capitalism, pretending to be a capitalist, hating communism. That's what this is how all nations, this is how all economies are. All economies are based off of supply, like about the upper class, the overclass trading with one another. But let's keep going. So he says, the whole of supposed wealth accumulated under our native system by cooperative labor is regularly and in a most orderly manner subdivided among all the people cooperating. He says, onto each according to his several abilities. Those whose efforts are worth more receive proportionally a greater share of the surplus. So this is something that you also have to consider, that those whose efforts are worth more receive, because that's what happens with the capitalists. The capitalists, while we might say that they're like the CEO, let's say the CEO actually does do more than the janitor, you know, or than the person who's assembling, you know, the cog in the machine. The CEO, or even said differently, like let's say you're in a car factory, right? The person who comes up with the design, like the engineer that decides how the car should be formulated, does actually do more than the person who's putting the wheel on, who's like tightening the wheel on the car, or like the safety inspector who's making sure, like, obviously all of these are important roles. But then now here's the thing that you want to understand about the CEO, all right? So what the CEO is supposed to do, right? Actually, the CEO does a number of things, but the CEO, in fact, I think it might have been in the Harsh Reality podcast again. So make sure you guys check out the Harsh Reality podcast, right, as well. But, or it could have even been a medicine podcast. Just make sure you check out all the podcasts that you can, you know, including Scully, obviously, right? But everybody in this comment section, just check out everything, you know, just subscribe to everybody and check out everything, because, you know, there's no reason not to get good information, right? But I recall somewhere hearing about how one of the main functions of a CEO is to get money from other sources. You know, like one of the main functions of a CEO is to get money from other people, from other, like that's what you're supposed to do. But not just that, the CEO also, and this is really important that you have to realize, the CEO is the one that's organizing the trade or the sale of the cars. If the cars are created and not sold, then no money is earned. You understand? No money is earned if the cars are created but not sold. All right? So if I build a car, it's like, or even like another way, it's like I write this book, right? And nobody buys it, right? Right? Then there's no money there. You understand? So the CEO, however, is going to be the one who's over everything to make sure that there is some sort of profit, and possibly the CEO's job is to make sure there's the biggest profit. right? Which means they might be cutting a deal, like a car company might be cutting a deal with McDonald's, or a car company might be cutting a deal with the blockbuster movie of the summer. You know, they are doing this, and this is what's bringing in the money. Not so much tightening the wheel. We understand tightening the wheel is important. We understand sweeping the floor is important. But if you're really going to talk about proportionally what brings the greatest share of the surplus, it is the sale. And setting up the sale. And that's not something that we have to, of course, the CEO is also going to fire people who don't do good and all that kind of, like the CEO is basically the leader, and the leader tends to get the most. Now, you might say, well, that sounds like some, pro-capitalism stuff. And it's like, no, it's not pro-capitalism stuff. We're just being realistic about what, about like, if we're going to, like, we can't just, like, we're just being realistic about how economies work. So Organic African Paradigm says, I have a lecture on my channel on how to become an elite. So that's really something I advise everybody to go check out, because like that's what you'd want to, I mean, not the negative type of elite, but you want to be able to, you want to, like, for Africa, you want to be one of those people who have the greatest share, who provide the greatest share of the surplus in Africa. That's what you want to do. Like, that's the kind of elite you want to be. You don't want to be elite who's corrupt and blah blah blah. But you want to be more than sweeping the floor or something. Nothing wrong with sweeping the floor, of course. Somebody has to do it. I just mopped my floor yesterday. You know what I'm saying? But that's not, but I'm saying that you also want to do more. If all I did was mop my floor, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm saying for you, maybe you want to do more. If you don't want to do more, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But anyway, let's keep going. The internal wars of the Africans have been largely in defense of his social institution. That's really important. Resisting men of his own tribe, anxious to aggrandize themselves at the expense of the people, right? So he's like, the internal wars of Africa has mostly been in defense of our social institutions. And as we were resisting the men of our tribes who were trying to aggrandize themselves at the expense of the people. You do not want, so like those are the kind of elites that we have to fight. And you see, this is what we used to do. We used to resist the elites who were aggrandizing themselves at the expense of the people. You don't want to aggrandize yourself at the expense of the people, right? You do want to aggrandize yourself, I guess, but not at the expense of other people, right? Not in that sense. More in the sense of, I'm going to get into a better position in order to help more people, in order, like I said, when I was in school, slap the kids back, you slap the kids back in order to help them. And you say to yourself, if I can become more powerful, I don't have to slap them individually, but I can set up, whatever. Obviously, slapping thing might not have been the right thing. Who knows? But, the point is that it was, where your heart is, right? But anyway, let's keep going. His wars against Europeans, and actually, I think maybe the lady told me, don't slap somebody's back, but instead say Gesundheit, or maybe even, what other people say, bless you or something. And it's like, I think it's less effective than slapping their back, but whatever. It's like, just say something good, But anyway, I don't know. I'm not too sure. It was a long time ago. All right, let's keep going. I'm actually getting hungry. Can you imagine that? I thought I ate enough. Because, usually my podcasts go a little shorter. All right. His wars against Europeans have always also been in defense of his institutions, which he regards as sacred. So, again, this is the law of Ma'at, defending your system. You're willing to put your life on the line for your institutions. Right now, we have to build up institutions so that we can actually defend our institutions. And we should consider our institutions sacred. Losing your indigenous schooling system, losing your indigenous marriages, losing your indigenous language should not be so light for our people. It should not be something that's not sacred for our people. And I've heard it should not be, right? But let's get going. Our natives who have accumulated money under the individual, and this is like the most important thing right here. We're going to talk about the law of disintegration. This is so important. All right. Let me just check the comments, make sure nothing so. EL says facts. Nothing serious has happened until money exchanged hands in a business. Yeah, in a business, nothing serious happened. You could build 500 cars, and nothing serious is gonna happen if you don't sell them. You know what I mean? Like, it don't matter what you build. Like, it's like it don't matter. you're not going to make any money. Period. But let's go. I'm going to read this paragraph. Listen carefully to this paragraph. I'm going to try to not even stop. Our natives who have accumulated money under the individualistic system of Europe cannot go back to their tribal home because their wealth would be subjected to distribution according to native custom and law. And in view of their training, it is impossible for them to submit now to such an arrangement. Therefore, they continue to live under the European order and are amenable to its vicissitudes. All their wealth, sooner or later, goes back to the European, in spite of the most stringent provisions of wills and codicils. Men may doubt this, object to it, hate it, and think that their case will be an exception to the rule. But the law goes on all the same. It is not a rule, but a law. The law of disintegration under the European competitive order. What he's saying right here is this, that as long as you are in a Western country, all that you get is going to end up back with that European country. Everything that you earn, sooner or later, is going to go right back to the European. It's the law. The only way for this to not happen is for you to leave, honestly. But as long as, and this is the thing that it's like, I have this quote, some sister was on my case about me having this quote and attributed it to myself, but as far as I understand, it is my quote, right? But the quote goes something along the lines, and it's in the pro-black compendium. So if you're not in the pro-black compendium, go out and get it. If you don't have the Book of Power, go out and get it. But the quote goes something along the lines of whoever controls the currency controls the commerce. Okay? So whoever controls the currency controls the commerce. Because the reality is this, that money, the money in your wallet is just paper. And the only people that value that paper are the Europeans. So that if you were to go out of the European value system, right? And of course, you probably have to go pretty far to get out of the European value system. But if you were to get out of the European value system where your currency could no longer be exchanged, or where people do not know how to exchange your currency, right? It's worth nothing. So like, for instance, a post-apocalyptic society with America gone or whatever, right? The dollar means nothing. It's like if I were to walk around with Roman coins, it will not do anything for anybody. Or if I were to walk around with cowrie shells in America, it doesn't do anything. You're not going to be able to buy anything with cowrie shells. You're not going to have to go to an exchange with cowrie shells. The reality is that all of your dollars. Now, of course, you could obviously convert it to blah, blah, blah. You could convert it. Let's say, because I know the brothers there about cryptocurrency. You could convert it to cryptocurrency. Or if you were in the middle of a remote, whatever, you could also still go to a city and change your dollar. Sure, that's the case. But the reality is that even that person, if you do change your dollar, that person is going to bring that dollar right back to Europe. You understand? Eventually, all the currency in circulation of the United States of America is coming back to the United States of America. Right? Unless you get out of the system. But it stands to reason that if you're in America, you want a boat or you want a plane, right? And you're going to spend that money, it's going right back to Europeans. Because the thing is that the boat maker or the plane maker in England is probably going to take pounds or something, right? Or in Germany, it might take euros, right? But he's not taking dollars. He's like, oh no, change that. You understand? So this is what it comes down to, that all of your wealth sooner or later goes back to the European. In spite of, your provisions of wills and codicils, it's always going to go back because it's theirs. It's their money. And I think it was really interesting. I think it was really, really interesting that somebody had a quote. They said that I think it was like from the Torah, the European Torah or whatever, right? And they were saying that if they go to a community that doesn't use currency, then they should impose on that community the use of currency. And it's like, that's really like I said, once upon a time we were doing worship. That's really a worship idea. because what it's saying is that essentially, instead of bartering, right? Instead of saying, hey, what currency does is it makes bartering easy for you to get the resources of another people. Like, as long as your values are towards the resources of another people, you are going to make it so that they are going to give up their resources. If they don't have the same values of their resources, then you're going to win. You understand? You're going to win. As long as you come to them and say, hey, here's some paper for your resources, for your mineral wealth. Here's some paper, right? Here's some credit, for your mineral wealth. You won. And they won't even suspect a thing. Because they're going to be like, oh, cool, I could use this paper to get, food. That's interesting, right? And so they're going to give you food for that paper. You know what I'm saying? And then now when they want food, they have to go to you because they lost their food. They lost their ability to barter. They lost what they're going to barter with, right? And now they have paper and only you, and you're controlling the paper. You understand? You create a false resource. So now they kind of, in a sense, get twice as much. You understand? It's imperative. And that's why I was thinking we as African people should buy the current, like I used to think this. I don't think this anymore, but I used to think we should be using the currency of our own people. You understand? We should be using our own people's currency for now, so that we could limit our spending with Wazungu. Because, if I go to any of these white stores with a Zimbabwe dollar, it's not going to do nothing. You understand? But here's what happens. If I get this Zimbabwe dollar, I'm able to give Zimbabwe these US dollars that are worth something, and then I can only spend my Zimbabwe dollar with people who are in the know. You know what I mean? Now, of course, eventually it does fall back to the Wazungu, but it also restrains and restricts my economy. But of course, I'm not saying that's a good idea. I'm just saying that was an idea I once upon a time had. But let's go back to the comments. So EL says institutions are the pillar of a nation, right? And that's the facts. Institutions are the pillar of a nation. That's facts. Organic said their case will be the exception to the rule. Yeah, they think their case will be the exception to the rule, but it's not, right? Revolutionary Matron, shout out. She says this is why training, relocation, and education are necessary, very necessary in anything that you're doing. This is like training, relocation, and education are how you wage war. Like these are steps towards warfare. You do not now like training and education and then relocation in a sense, but or relocation training. But like you want to do these things in order to actually engage in battles and engage in war. And the reality that we don't do that is almost shameful, right? Scully comes back and says there's always that individual or group who believes it won't happen to them. Always. Revolutionary Matron says meritorious manumission is the basis for this false understanding. That's facts. Meritorious manumission, for those who do not know, is that white folks saying, like, during the time of slavery, but also to this day, they would say, you could be free if you turn against your own people. Or you could be free if you stop an insurrection. You could be free if you save a white person's life. You could be free if you do in your own people. This is how you could be free as an enslaved African, right? And of course, they wouldn't always faithfully do this, but it goes to show that, they could psychologically contort you. Because if they have control of your reward and punishment system, right? They control your reward and punishment system. They control you, right? That's power. It's already power. EL says our presence in the West is an investment in the European system. Always. The taxes strengthens the government, and the government supports the European world order. Obviously, the government is going to support their world order because the government is the one imposing it, right? Organic African Practice says the bottom line is as long as you have a strong military, you can impose your will. Exactly. And this is why you'd want to strengthen your own military. Because again, when we talk about governments, the government taxes, the government is the one paying for the U.S. military. And everybody knows this. If you look at the U.S. military budget, the breakdown, I think it's like 20-40% goes to whatever. But if you look at the breakdown of how the taxes are, it's from business and personal tax. So personal and business tax makes up 90% of the government's revenue, and the government makes up 100% of the military's revenue, So you supporting these American businesses and you supporting this American government in taxes is in fact like all that the military is really getting. Now, of course, in the military, and now the military is obviously going abroad to exploit other people and make the businesses more profitable and blah, blah, blah. But the point being that, yeah, it's a system that if you really were to be against it, just get out. You know? Absolutely, a strong African military is the key. Strong African military is the key. That's it. You know? All right, we're going to keep going. So, earnest missionaries in their innocence and goodwill strove from the very first to destroy the communistic order of African life because they saw that the whole system was based upon and grew out of the family arrangement, which in their lack of scientific knowledge and entire misconception of their spiritual text, they abhorred. So he's saying this, earnest missionaries. This is earnest missionaries. In their innocence and goodwill. He's like, all right, so like they're innocent. Okay. But the innocence and goodwill strove from the very first to destroy the communistic order of African life. Our people had a very benevolent, beneficial, mutual aid kind of lifestyle. And the Christian church, right, or the European, a spiritualist in a sense, came to our land and said, we hate this stuff. Right? We hate this, and we don't like how you guys are not individualistic. We don't like how you guys like sharing and you guys are practicing Uhuru or Ubuntu or whatever, right? We don't like that, like we abhor it. And that's what happens. He said the white once told the writer that the abolition of the African family organization has done more harm to the permanent interests of the people than all the reputed cannibalism on the whole continent. So he's like, so this is what a white person who's like honest, right? Or let's not say a white honest person, but let's not say they're all dishonest. But the point is this, that a white person told him, he said, you know what? I realize now that when we abolished the African family organization, that did more harm than this freaking lie that we made up about them being cannibals. It harmed the permanent. And so now today, to this day, we hear black folks saying we got to get the family back together. Yeah. White people know this. But they purposely destroyed it. They purposely destroyed it. But they know this. I think in the original text, so, if you want to go look at the original text, he probably says the name of this white guy. I didn't because I don't like white people like that. But, it is what it is. I know some people might be like, well, I'm not the black. Look, I told you where to get it. I told you who to look into. And I told you who to look into because I want you to look into these people. But I also think that as African people, that, for this book, I don't need you saying that I don't need to immortalize these crackers. You know what I mean? If you guys want to immortalize crackers, that's fine. I don't. I don't. You know what I'm saying? So this principle has long been recognized by Africans of culture. A distinguished African had pronounced, Aman does not intend to have the races confounded, but that the Africans in Africa should be raised upon the basis of his own idiosyncrasy. So he's like, Africans, we should not all be together. The races are not intended to be confounded. They're intended to be raised upon by themselves by the basis of their own idiosyncrasies, right? Let's keep going. We have had among us educated natives who have accumulated money on the European system and have tried to apply it to the development of agriculture on the individualistic plan. Some have spent thousands of pounds and devoted years of labor to this enterprise, have built large, substantial houses with the idea of making permanent centers for their works, but all without exception have failed. Their habitations are now tenanted by bats and other noxious vermins. The frillest of houses is the house of the spider. So, yeah, this is something that you realize too, that when you look inside of Africa, there are a lot of really good pieces of property for sale, right? And they're for sale for cheap, right? And part of the reason why they're for sale for cheap is because the system that built those houses, right? Like they're now empty, and they're selling for cheap because they're worth nothing. They're worth nothing. If you have a house in a poor economy, if you didn't work on developing the economy, then your house means nothing. Because nobody could afford it. Nobody could reasonably afford it except for foreigners, and that's the people who want to buy it up now. So let's keep going. So with organizations among civilized Africans, whether for industrial, educational, or spiritual work, they do not succeed. They have often been tried here and elsewhere on the coast. They do not succeed because they violate the law of African life and growth. For after all, they involve what might be called a plural egotism, right? That's what the system that we have. We don't have to call it capitalism. We call it plural egotism, right? They do not imply the we of the communal life. They are competitive organizations not only to promote their own, but to circumscribe the prosperity of others. And that's another thing. They don't just promote their own, but they circumscribe the prosperity of others. Like the combines in Europe, they threaten the life of others. And this Africa will not allow. What is mine goes, what is ours abides. So he's like, now, unfortunately, this is Africa 100 years ago. Now, this is, Africa finally, relented, right? But back then, it was what is mine goes and what is ours abides. So he's like, if you come into Africa with a communal spirit, right, it's going to abide. But of course, now it's the opposite. But we can bring it back, and we should bring it back, and we can bring it back. So that's what we have to do. That was the whole passage. Let's just look at these comments. And thank you everybody for the comments. This is the most activity I've ever had for reading the Book of Power, but I like it, so appreciate it. Organic African Paradigm says, how did they destroy it? Context. How did they destroy the African family organization? He's asking. Well, I mean, like the whole family structure of like basically they're like, I mean, some people would actually tell. I mean, some people do admit that the quote unquote nuclear family, right? Nuclear family. Is in fact a foreign introduction that Africans used to have. Like a lot of times, Africa would have structures of a wider, like more extended family unit, and white people do actually try to destroy that. So he says, I'm curious how Europeans destroy the family structure in Africa. I'm aware of how they did it in Black America, but Africa itself is still too ambiguous as to how they did. So yeah, I mean, the missionaries, I think he's talking about the Christian communities in Africa and how the missionaries. So a lot of the missionaries did not penetrate Africa. So what we see in like communal villages are not what we see in urban life. Urban cities and urban life and missionary outposts and missionary centers have a different family structure, and they're more egotistic. They're more plural. They have the more plural egotism than they do outside of like that they do in the village. And so basically, they destroy the village life in the sense that every urban center in Africa probably was over a village at one point. You know what I mean? Or was over some sort of other existence, and they just transformed and changed it. So, but it's kind of like how you will notice a difference between the like you just notice the difference between the urban African and the rural African. The rural African has a different family structure than the urban African. So let's just keep going. He says the elimination of polygamy was a major factor because majority of our connection was through polygamous family ties. Well, the polygamy is an interesting conversation, a whole different conversation. I think polygamy. Well, I personally, by my research, or by Job, I tend to defer to Job. Job was not. He was not a fan. Like he did not. He thinks that polygamy came in later in Africa's our story. So he believes it came after the Almoravid invasion. This can be either because the Almoravid or the Islamicists were polygamous, or because the Islamicists were kidnapping men and making men more scarce, and bringing war and making men more scarce, and that might have brought about polygamy. But realistically speaking, he's saying that prior to that, Africa seemed to be pretty universally monogamous, with the exception of the upper class who might have been more traveled, or who might have taken on, like, who might have done it for social status. But now it's kind of like realistically speaking, the Muslim invasion had an impact on that sort of family structure as well. And Revolutionary Matron says the family system is destroyed when you introduce scarcity to a community. So that's kind of also goes along with this whole polygamy thing. And Alma Bookman says they destroyed the extended families by creating economic structures that compelled people to abandon their village family compounds. And so that's another truism as well. That yeah. And so shout out to Alma Bookman for showing up. And so Organic African Paradigm says that's not true. I don't know what he might be referring to something before, but maybe if he's talking about the polygamy thing, I would say, that's really Chuck on the joke. He's saying that, and again, it's really complicated because there's also going to be different structures in Africa. So it's like a matter of exceptions versus rules, So you're going to find everything, everywhere. You know what I mean? You're always going to find an exception everywhere. So if that's what you mean, like, cause I know there's like this one village where the women are like marrying multiple men. You know what I mean? It's not the norm across Africa, but it's something that happened. Revolutionary Matron says intermarriages and the children of foreign fathers had different values. So that's another thing too. Organic Scully says Islam had nothing to do with African polygamy. Well, that's what I'm saying. I would not. It's not on my. It's not me saying this. It's more Cheikh on the Job saying this. So Cheikh on the Job is saying after he did research in the polygamy question, he came across the reality that like all of the artwork in Africa or all of the community talk discussions in Africa are well, not all, but like 99%, right? Kind of related this idea of male female balance. And then after the Muslims took, invaded Northern Africa and began enslaving Africans en masse, that whole balanced system transformed, right? Now, as to whether it has to do with Islam or whether it has to do with an invasion and slavery, it's not really too clear. I would lend to this. I mean, because again, one of the things that they would say is that Islam did not penetrate a lot of Africa. But at the same time, this is in Liberia, the tribe I come from had limited contact with Muslims, but polygamy was seen extending family ties. Yeah, was seen extending family ties. Yeah, the thing is, again, so Islam, the thing with Islam, the thing with that is we have to understand that the impact of Islam is like the impact of any country or any nation is not going to be so self-evident. It's going to be very basically Islam during the 8th century to the 13th century, right? So for 500 years is the global superpower. You get what I'm saying? So it is what England eventually becomes, and it is what America becomes. It is what China is aspiring to, right? So as the global superpower for 500 years, it's going to have an influence. Yeah, and South Africa, even Shaka Zulu was born from his main wife. Yeah, it's going to have an influence on the politics of a lot of people, notwithstanding whether or not they are Muslim or not. You get what I'm saying? So if there is this global power that's stretching across of North Africa, stretching across Southern Europe, stretching across what is known as the Middle East, but you could say Western Asia, right? It's this huge power that consumes 3 continents, right? Or sorry, not consumes, but is part of 3 continents. Is if this entity is also sending in people to steal from other people, and so on, it's steal like from other smaller nations and negotiate with smaller nations, and it has this huge politically influential religious system. It's going to have an impact on the farthest reaches of the planet because human beings, realistically speaking, are not just like isolated people who do not have any influence from foreign powers. So even to this day, like me, all right, like there's this video recently on Twitter where this white boy just goes to like some remote village with his camera, I guess during COVID or something. But the thing is that he's like this is the reality of the world, where For instance, you say Mali, you say in Liberia, right? Hold on a second. Let me just look this up quickly. Cause like essentially there was like this huge empire called the Mali Empire, right? Who is, if I'm not mistaken, well, Mali today. Okay, so let's see the Mali Empire, which is this huge Muslim empire, right? And then hold on a second. Let's just see. Hey, actually, Scully, if you can, you could actually, can you tell me what your the name of your you said your group was? Okay, but if you guys want, all right. So here's what I'm going to show you guys right here. So this is I'll try to share my screen. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, so this is Liberia, right? This is Liberia, and this is the Mali Empire, right? So the Mali Empire is this huge empire. This is Liberia over here. This is the Mali Empire, and it's this huge Muslim empire, right? That's expanding and going to war with countries over here. There was the Songhai Empire that collapsed, and there was the Mali Empire where people would flee and run. And so the idea would be that this Mali Empire, with the Timbuktu, which we in America know about, it would be that Timbuktu, Jenne, which is, I believe that's where Sunjata is from, right? But that this Mali Empire had like this culture, this hugely powerful Muslim empire, and yet it had no influence anywhere outside of its borders in regards to its norms and culture. And the thing is that it's not going to be it's not going to be that realistic to say that this empire, and this is not even including the fact that, hold on a second. This is not even including the fact that, like the Arab, like the Muslim empire of the 14th century. Let's see like how widespread Islam was in the 14th century. Let's see if we can actually find the golden age of Islam. Okay, so this is what they would say is the golden age. I don't know why they only put it this far, but we can see if we could pull that up. So this is what they say was Islam during the. Actually no, this is just during 622 to 750. So this is how large, this is how massive Islam was. Like it took over this part, it took over here, it took over here. Eventually, it goes over here, it spreads to over here. There's a whole Mali empire over here, right? And so on and so forth. So it's to say that Islam it's not to say that you have to be a Muslim in order to take on the practices of the Muslims. You know what I mean? It would be a coincidence if you didn't. It would be a coincidence if you didn't. But I mean, if you just naturally developed the habits of the global superpower without the influence of the global superpower. But again, I think that's a larger conversation, but it's not too clear. Let's just see. So he says, Amma Bookman says, polygamy appears to be more prevalent where the slave trade was more prevalent. The influence of Islam may not be in bringing their culture, but creating an environment that created gender imbalance. He says, Islamic polygamy stripped the African woman of her power, making her a servant. Yes, that's true. So that's another thing that we want to realize. So there's this book called Ibn Battuta, Observations in Black Africa, where the people who there are Muslims, they have this thing called female friends, and the Arab Muslim is repulsed, and he's like, why do you have a man who was a female friend? And he's like, well, because our women are not like your women, So yes, there is like there's to a large degree there is a dispute, but it's just very, like, again, I wouldn't have to know. Amma Bookman says the slave trade both east and west targeted black men. It goes back to the 7th century, and throughout, men were more likely to be enslaved. Yeah. And then Scully says we need to have a conversation on this topic. Yeah, it's an interesting topic, but until that's set up, I mean, I don't know if you meant with me or whatever, but until that's set up, it is what it is. But I think it's an interesting conversation. But as it is, we finished this reading the book, and I believe that eventually I do get into polygamy in this book. So, but not next week. Next week is going to be John Edward Bruce. That's another brilliant brother from 1889. But other than that, I think it was I was very fortunate to have everybody here. Shout out to everybody who participated. Organic African Paradigm. Make sure you guys check him out. I'm a Bookman. Make sure you check her out. Revolutionary Matron. Make sure you check her out. Make sure you check him out. Obviously, Bitter Medicine Podcast. You know, great organizer, right? And then of course Mchaka. He's a brother from another mother. You know what I mean? But all right, family. Thank you so much for joining. And we'll you know, until next week or until next time, Shem Yam Hotep. I mean, I'm thinking about doing a Malcolm X thing, but of course, Shem Yam Hotep for now. Oh, subscribe if you haven't. All right.